Guys, it's Boxing Gossip here. Hope everyone's doing well. Recording this video just after lunchtime on a rather lazy Sunday afternoon. This morning I've woken up, I've watched the Alexander Usyk fight, I've watched the Bernard Hopkins fight. I've heard the news about Gennady Golovkin versus Danny Jacobs. We're going to do something on the channel soon to cover all of those bits of news. This week on Wednesday, we got the podcast as ever, 8:30 on Wednesdays. This week we're going to be doing if you like, a Boxing Gossip Awards type podcast. So we're going to have various different categories: Fighter of the Year, Knockout of the Year, you know the stuff. And we're going to debate the various nominations between the podcast panel. And that's something that I'm looking forward to. But before we get there, I've been promising to make this video for a little bit of time. And the video relates to Huey Fury. In the UK, and I say in the UK because increasingly, I know that a number of the subscribers and people who tune into this channel are from all over the world. But in the UK, Huey Fury, amongst the boxing hardcore, is viewed as one of the most exciting prospects out there. Now, I appreciate that if you are someone who has seen one or two rounds of Huey Fury fighting, and if you are someone who hasn't followed this guy's career, he may be someone who you don't instantaneously look at and think he's going to be a future world champion. He lacks the immediate athleticism that you see in an Anthony Joshua or a Joseph Parker. He lacks the stunning one-punch knockout power that you see in a Deontay Wilder, for example. He lacks the celebrity-style personality that you see in a Tyson Fury or one of those sort of guys. And I can understand why, if you've only watched one or two clips of Huey Fury, you could be under the impression that this guy is a Category B prospect. However, in my estimations, as someone who has watched, I believe I'm right in saying I've watched every single one of Huey Fury's fights in the professional ring, I believe that the guy is a definite world champion in the making. When I look at prospects, especially in the heavyweight division, the key thing that I look for is well-roundedness. I look for someone who has a little bit of everything. I look for someone who can adapt their game, bring a plan B, recreate themselves mid-fight. And when I try and assess which prospects have that ability, I'm inclined to go for prospects who are what I would class as technicians or chess players, as opposed to guys who get by predominantly with their athleticism or their power. And when I look at Huey Fury, I view him as probably one of the most, if not the most exciting heavyweight prospects out there. He's very, very young. He's a baby in the context of the heavyweight division. But according to Frank Warren and various other sources, he is on the verge of fighting for a world title, potentially within the next 3 to 6 months. In fact, if you believe certain sources, he has two options available to him. Option 1 is fighting Deontay Wilder for the WBC belt in the US. Option 2 is fighting Joseph Parker for the WBO belt. Now, they're interesting options. Both of them have big pros. Let's look at Deontay Wilder first and foremost. Deontay Wilder, you could make a case for Deontay Wilder being the number one heavyweight on the planet, given that Tyson Fury is currently in retirement. He's also coming off an extended break, having sustained a substantial injury. One could argue that fighting Deontay Wilder next up would actually be the right time to catch him. Beating Deontay Wilder would propel Huey Fury to global superstardom within boxing. It would probably lead to Huey Fury being announced as the number one heavyweight on the planet. Deontay Wilder's an attractive fight. However, he's a very, very risky fight. Deontay Wilder's a hugely athletic, hugely aggressive, one-punch knockout, power-punching heavyweight. There's flaws to his game. He's not the smoothest operator. He's a bit wild. He perhaps lacks the sort of complete technical skill set that some of the other heavyweights out there have. But he's a dangerous fighter, definitely. Uh, the Joseph Parker fight is the fight that I think is more realistic. For a start, Huey Fury is actually the mandatory challenger for Joseph Parker's belt. Now, this wasn't initially the case. I believe initially David Haye was the mandatory to fight the winner of Joseph Parker Ruiz. But David Haye lost that position, as I understand it, when he agreed to fight Tony Bellew in a non-title fight. So as a result, Huey Fury, who was the next available ranked contender, has been moved into that mandatory slot. Now, given that he's due to fight Joseph Parker in that mandatory position, I believe the purse split would be 75% to the champion, 25% to the challenger. That's an interesting situation because that potentially means that Huey Fury has the potential of getting this fight in the United Kingdom. I read an article that said Joseph Parker got over $1 million New Zealand dollars for his fight against Andy Ruiz. Now that was a 50-50 purse split bid, being a vacant title. So that leads me to believe that the total purse to get that fight was somewhere between 2 million New Zealand dollars and 2.5 million New Zealand dollars. Now I appreciate that's a lot of money. I appreciate in particular that's a lot of money in the New Zealand boxing scene. What I would say, and with the greatest deal of respect, that's not a lot of money in the UK boxing scene. Could the Furies, Frank Warren, etc. Win a purse bid situation by bidding more than 2.5 million New Zealand dollars? I think very possibly they could. Very, very possibly they could. Especially with Frank Warren and that team in the UK now having won the opportunity to broadcast live on BT Sports over here in the UK. You know, they've got huge backing and they're going to be looking to put on big shows. And I think Huey Fury fighting a Verson for the world heavyweight title could be a big, big, big opportunity. Now, there's no chance they'd be able to get Deontay Wilder over to the UK because the Deontay Wilder fight would be a voluntary matchup. It wouldn't be mandatory. The way it works, just for those who don't know, is that when a fight is mandated, Parker versus Huey Fury, unless a deal is made, it goes to purse bids, and whichever promoter bids the highest amount gets the right to host a show. So I would suggest when the purse bids, when the fight is called for Huey Fury versus Joseph Parker, it may well be that neither side comes to an arrangement and a purse bid is called. And I actually think, despite the fact that Joseph Parker would get 75% of the money, it's very, very possible that the UK and Team Fury and Frank Warren, etc., could come up with a bid to get that over to the UK, which would be a substantial advantage for Huey Fury. You know, I've long thought it was a little bit of a negative for Joseph Parker that he's had the majority of his big fights in New Zealand rather than getting experience on the road. And I think if they were to get this fight over in the UK, it would be a big shot in the arm for Huey Fury. I also believe, looking at the fight, that at this stage of his career, Joseph Parker still has a lot of flaws in his game. For me, Parker is at his most comfortable when he is allowed to box on the outside with a load of range, a load of time, a load of distance, a load of space. Now, we've seen him go up against taller guys before, but the tall guys he's been up against, Alexander Dimitrenko, Daniel Martz, those type of guys, to be honest, they put in very, very poor performances and are probably not what you would consider elite heavyweights in terms of the top 30 or 40 in the division at this stage of their careers. Now, whilst heavyweights can pose a different stylistic threat at every level, realistically, a guy like Joseph Parker has proved that he's elite enough to run through heavyweights at that sort of class, regardless of the style and the size and the technique that they bring to the ring. My concern is, now Parker's a world champion, now he's stepping up, certainly, you know, fighting the Carlos Takams, Andy Ruiz's of this world. Now he's operating at that sort of level. I actually think he is a heavyweight who's going to be more susceptible to struggling against certain styles. Now, I've long thought Parker's at his best when he's allowed to dictate from range behind his jab and use his long-range boxing. His combination punching is excellent. His hand speed is excellent, as we know. His jab is excellent when he uses it. And his footwork, you know, he's got athleticism. He can move well. So for me, the ideal Joseph Parker fight is him circling an opponent on the outside, peppering them with the jab, throwing flashy combinations, and opening people up behind his long range boxing. I don't think he likes it when people bring the pace to him. I don't think he likes it when people put the pressure on the inside and bring the fight onto his chest. I believe he's more comfortable in the outside boxing game. So I think in his last few fights, we've seen him have his greatest periods of success when floating around on the outside and getting that jab established. The difficulty for him is, I actually think that's where Huey Fury is at his most comfortable as well. But having met Huey Fury and having seen both of them fight extensively, at this point I'm convinced that Huey Fury is the bigger man who uses his jab better and who's probably the better mover on the outside. What I'm getting at is, I think here what you're going to have is two guys fighting in actually a very, very similar manner. A very similar manner. I think these are both guys who are going to want to stand off each other. I think they're both guys who are going to want time and space. I think they're both guys who are going to want to get their jab going early on and start picking away at their opponent and start circling. And I don't actually think Joseph Parker has had that in his career to date. He's had guys like Alexander Dimitrenko who've tried to box with him at range, but let's be honest, the levels there were so different that didn't actually turn into a test whatsoever for him. With Huey Fury, you're going to have a guy who, like Joseph Parker, has a spectacular jab, but unlike Joseph Parker, uses it supremely effectively. In every video I've done following on from Joseph Parker fights, I've made a comment saying something similar to, Parker has an excellent jab, he just doesn't use it very well, he doesn't double it up, he doesn't drop it to the body, etc. Huey Fury throws everything off the jab. He works very, very nicely off the jab. You see Huey Fury's whole game, his body work, his movement, his circling, everything revolves around that jab. And Huey's got one of the best jabs already in boxing. Now, I'm not saying Parker's jab couldn't be as good, but he certainly hasn't shown in his career to date that he can use it as effectively as Huey Fury, for my money. I suspect that the jab will be a key element of this fight, because you have got two guys here who like to fight long. And I also think this will be the first time Joseph Parker will have gone in with a guy who's bigger than him at a similar level. Now, Huey's resume, I would admit, is a lot weaker than Joseph Parker's. At this stage, you're not seeing a Carlos Takam or an Andy Ruiz on Huey Fury's resume. Parker's been in with the higher level of opposition. My concern for Joseph Parker is, as he stepped up to that sort of opposition, he has got through by the skin of his teeth. I think I scored both of those fights to Cam and Ruiz. I think I scored both of them 7-5 to Joseph Parker. There was controversy in both fights. A lot of people had both fights to draw. A lot of people had the opponent winning both fights. There's, even amongst the New Zealand boxing community, there's a lot of debate as to who actually won those fights. So my suggestion there, if you like, is that Joseph Parker is maybe slightly ahead of that level. You've got your Takams, you've got your Ruizes. Parker's slightly ahead of that, but it's marginal. He's winning these fights, but he's winning them in a very, very, very competitive fashion. So the question comes, how highly do you rate Carlos Takam? How highly do you rate Andy Ruiz? Now, I rate both guys. I think they're both solid heavyweights. But if I look at them, I don't really see them as top 10 heavyweights. No way. I look at Carlos Takam against Mike Perez earlier on in his career, and I certainly thought at the time Mike Perez was a more skilled, more capable operator. Takam, very, very likeable fighter. Someone who lacks power, someone who lacks speed, someone who lacks snap and technique to his work. Andy Ruiz, again, a likeable fighter, but someone who lacks conditioning, someone who lacks work rate in the ring, someone who potentially is quite defensively frail if you look back at some of his earlier fights. What I'm getting at is these are good fighters. This is by no means looking to denigrate Joseph Parker's resume. But for my money, Parker, despite being stronger than Huey Fury in terms of resume, is yet to actually be a genuine fighter in the top 7 or 8 in the world. For me, he's yet to beat someone of that ilk. And when he stepped up to, let's call it top 15 level, when he stepped up to top 15 level, he's won by an inch. Now, with Huey Fury, he has been operating more in what I would consider the top 30 to 40 level. He's been operating a level below Joseph Parker. His best win is probably Fred Cassie, which was a bad fight in which Huey Fury got cut. There's a few other notable wins. Andre Rudenko, he's a decent fighter. Dominic Gwynn, he's a very experienced operator. There's a few other decent names on Huey Fury's resume off the top of my head, but I think it's fair to say he's been dealing at top 30 to 40 level. The difference is for me, Huey Fury has shown a huge amount of discipline in those wins. It's actually very hard to find a round that Huey Fury has really lost in his career to date. I cannot think of a fight where Huey Fury has had extended trouble in the ring, where he's had a really, really bad round, where he's been hurt or where the opponents look like he's got the better of it. Now, arguably, that's a negative. You don't want a guy who's a young prospect stepping into a big fight without that experience under his belt. You want someone to be tested and someone to have proven their resilience and their adaptability. But for me, the reason Huey Fury hasn't had any of those problems is because he is so technically complete. Parker, for me, is someone who lacks the fundamental in-ring discipline of a Huey Fury. Huey Fury is patient, disciplined, controlled, and smooth at all points in the ring, whereas Parker is maybe overly keen to engage, less defensively aware, and less reliant on his fundamentals. And I think if the fight were to happen, and for my money it looks like it very possibly will happen, I would actually make Huey Fury a favourite in the fight. Now, Parker fans will know that I've been covering Joseph Parker on my channel for a long, long time now. Many years, 3 or 4 years. And Parker fans who have followed me from the start will know that I've actually picked Joseph Parker to win every single one of the fights that he's been in. I've been a big fan of Joseph Parker. There's 2 guys on this channel, Tyson Fury and Joseph Parker, who I've picked out at prospect stage, and I've said that I believe they'll go on to be world champions. And I've picked them in every single one of their fights, and for those 2 guys, I've been right. That's not to say I'm not wrong frequently on other fighters, but for those 2 guys, I've been right. So I am a fan of Joseph Parker. Right now, I actually do think Huey Fury beats him. There's been a lot of rawness, a lot of greenness in Joseph Parker's game. There's been problems defensively in the past. There's been problems with him being very, very open to getting caught when he's engaging. There's been a lack of head movement, a lack of upper body movement. For me, there's an uncomfortableness from Parker when he's on the back foot. There's an uncomfortableness when the fight gets up close. And fundamentally, Parker's biggest weakness for me is the fact that he is not using that jab, which is the best gift he has. Now, picking an opponent to beat him, I would pick one of 2 styles. I'd pick a guy like Alexander Povetkin, who fought last night in disgraceful circumstances. Someone who's got that diet Mike Tyson approach. That sort of, I'm not saying Povetkin necessarily uses a peekaboo style, but someone who's getting low, someone who's throwing to the body, someone who's coming up at awkward angles, someone who's smaller, who's going to close the gap, who's going to close the range, and who's going to make things awkward and throw power punches up close. I think Joseph Parker would hate that kind of fighter. I also think he'd hate the bigger fighter who takes his long range game away from him. Let's cast our mind back to Vladimir Klitschko, Tyson Fury. Klitschko spent his whole career being the outside guy with the jab. For me, that's a similarity between Klitschko and Parker. I'm not saying they fight similarly. I'm not saying they look the same in the ring. But these are 2 guys who have fought their whole career being the big man in the ring, dictating the fight from range, controlling the pace, and using their long-range game. When Tyson Fury fought Vladimir Klitschko couldn't use his normal game because Tyson Fury was so big, Tyson Fury was so awkward. Vladimir couldn't find a place for his jab, and Vladimir didn't have that tactical versatility. My concern is that against a guy like Huey Fury, Joseph Parker will actually find himself in the same boat. Joseph Parker's going to be circling on the outside, but for me, he's going to be circling against a guy with better footwork. He's going to be throwing a jab, but Huey Fury's jab is going to be longer, and Huey Fury is going to be using his jab better than Joseph Parker. Huey's going to be doubling up, he's going to be changing levels, he's going to be working off the body with that jab. It's a fascinating fight. Two very young heavyweights, two very undefeated heavyweights. Parker's got advantages in there. Parker's got a hand speed advantage. Parker's got a power advantage. Parker's got an athleticism advantage. But for me, Huey Fury's got a technical advantage. Huey Fury's got a discipline advantage. And most importantly, Huey Fury's got a jab advantage. The key question for me, what is Parker going to do when the bigger man lands his jab on Joseph Parker? What adaptation is he going to bring? For me, Parker doesn't have an inside game to win fights. If Huey Fury can start establishing that jab and actually put Parker on his back foot, for me it's going to be a very, very tough fight for Joseph Parker to win. I predict that this fight is going to happen. I think this fight happens next for Joseph Parker. And I actually predict that Huey Fury beats him and goes on to win the WBO World Championship off the back of it. Let me know your thoughts, people. I know this is controversial. I know a lot of the New Zealand fans believe that Parker is battle tested well and above what Huey Fury is, and I know people think that Parker's got a huge power and athleticism advantage, but for me, power and athleticism doesn't always win boxing, and despite the fact I've been a fan and a supporter of Parker for a very, very, very long time, I've been keen all the way along to point out potential deficiencies in his game. When you believe a fighter has deficiencies, you're going to believe that at some point in their career against a certain opponent, those deficiencies are going to get called to the fore. And I believe that opponent's going to be Huey Fury. And I think Huey Fury, if they do fight in the next 3 to 6 months, probably has the beating of Joseph Parker in what would be a very competitive and very entertaining fight. Let me know your predictions. Does the fight happen? If it does happen, who wins? If you've enjoyed this video, please take the time to hit the thumbs up button. If you're new to the channel, please do subscribe. Many thanks indeed for watching.